Welcome to the post-pandemic. Welcome to the post-pandemic urban trends webinar. I'm Nawal Al-Qasim, a research assistant at the Center for Local Governance and the moderator for today's webinar. We have an exciting lineup of speakers who will share with us their insights on different aspects of urban planning in the post-pandemic era. Now, excuse me. To commence this webinar, let's start with a warm welcoming note from Dr. Zahir Athman, the General Secretary for the Center for Local Governance. Dr. Athman, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Masā al-khair. Good evening to everybody. Honored to be with you to inaugurate this webinar on post-pandemic urban trends hosted by the Center for Local Governance at Prince Sultan University. Time repeats itself. Historically, at least in our traditional history, we used to name years by the big events that happens, including pandemics. We thought that was over, but COVID-19 pandemic had told us that it hasn't. And today we document our time and events actually by referring to before COVID-19 and after COVID-19, 3 years before or after. In the wake of the unprecedented challenges posed by the pandemic, the global landscape has undergone a profound transformation, particularly in our urban centers. The pandemic itself has disrupted our socioeconomic structures and compelled us to reevaluate and re-examine fundamental aspects of our urban environments. This webinar serves as a beacon for insight into the lasting impacts of the pandemic on our global cities. It aims to shed light on the challenges highlighted by the pandemic and explore venues for exclusive, resilient, and just urban planning. One would need to point out with pride that the exceptional efforts that Saudi Arabia took to handle the pandemic were appreciated by the whole world. The objectives are clear. It is to offer a vital perspective that enables urban policymakers and decision makers to navigate the post-pandemic era by embracing sustainable trends. Today's discussion of this webinar will discuss and insights will hopefully pave the way for transformative practices, policies, and management principles that foster inclusive, resilient, and just urban environment for us all. I extend my sincere gratitude to all of the distinguished speakers, Dr. Maki Mihafi, Dr. Nahid Zaman, Dr. Kampisi, Dr. Ahmed Rashid, and to the moderator of the webinar, Nawal Al-Qasim. With pleasure and honor, I invite Dr. Abdullah Al-Ghwayzan, the CEO of the Public Health Authority, who couldn't be more better for this event, to give us his presentation. Marhaba, welcome to you all. Dr. Abdullah, you're most welcome. وأهلا وسهلا بك.
حياكم الله جميعا. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you very much for the organization committee. My name is Abdullah Al-Ghwayzani. It's my pleasure to be here with you, and I'm really excited about the topic. The fact that it's a subject that it's close to my heart. So is my presentation is in this slide?
ايوه نعم تفضل.
So when we talk about the urbanization and pandemic, it's very critical to allude that urban or urbanization trend or urban infrastructure actually has great impact on term of pandemic. It make be a potential of vulnerability for the city, for example, for to be high risk for having a big hit in any pandemic, or it can make the city actually more resilient and has actually to ameliorate the risk of infection. The pandemic, it's always happening. It's not if, it's actually when the next pandemic is going to be. So not only the urban designing of the city will make the city actually more resistant for infection. If you take for example, the crowdedness of neighborhood, whether it's towers or apartments, or if you, that would be an risk. And also the designing of the urban neighborhood, which may indicate make the flow of people more close and crowded. That's in terms of the infectious risk. And also how the urban actually is being designed to make it walk friendly, close to each the necessary, make the people healthier in terms of physical activity. And for that, by being healthy, not having a chronic diseases or risk factor, by themselves they will be resistant or resilient, and also not easily affected by any viruses. And the example around the world is huge. You can see big city and low medical income country, they get hit very well by the pandemic, and some city where they have a good planning, good infrastructure, they are very fortunate, and they managed to have a very peaceful pandemic. So when COVID-19, for example, pandemic started to peak on the globe, many countries started to prepare a response by developing mitigation action to protect the people during their daily services. Big urban cities were more susceptible to higher rate of infection due to dense population, crowdedness, working and gathering places, and scarcity of green and open spaces. And that was evident. Saudi Arabia, one of the first countries that actually has implemented, took a precautionary response and measure at the national and regional level to protect the public to the fullest possible extent. Such mass online schooling shut down the schools, and you remember, and virtual work, virtual healthcare services, and social distancing, and mass vaccination. And all this one was within. We've been fortunate with a very good urban infrastructure to deliver such services. And the effect of pandemic action in urban area during the hit were identified, as people moving to less dense area, work remotely, less usage of public transportation, social distancing is usual gathering, and less traffic and air pollution. So it was during the pandemic, it was evident that having such measures has reduced a lot of things regarding the air pollution and etc. Still, the post pandemic, we're living in the post pandemic, and the long term impact of this action actually is worth studying. The change of behavior worth monitoring, especially in terms of what people want in terms of urban designing. Continuous monitoring of the health indicator in the coming period is essential actually to utilize the lesson learned from the pandemic into better outcome post-pandemic. Planning to redesign the urban area to overcome a future risk is important step to build resilience, as I said, and sustainable and prosperous country future. For example, turning into distant education at work might induce a sedentary lifestyle. So, God forbid, for the next pandemic, we need to really prepare the urban site to be more friendly for enhancing. Even if you have a lockdown or a physical distance, we should have a way of make people moving and exhibit some exercise. Fear and less use of public transportation may lead to increase the use of private car, and that may have impact on the later on in the air pollution. Increased greenery and change in the climate change may increase the number of mosquito. Again, this is another side that need to be taken consideration. So there are positive and a lot of positive area where you can emphasize.
دكتور عبد الله معلش اقاطعك بس بدي احط العرض تعمله فول سكرين.
It is full screen.
لا تضغط تحت في جنب اللي يكبر ويصغر هذا على تحت في الكورنر اليمين.
هو على
طيب.
واضح الحين؟
ايوه
واضح الآن؟
ايوه واضح.
Okay. So the pandemic has highlighted the importance of preparedness, overwatch, and investment in precautionary measures, addressing a new pattern of urban trend post-pandemic and build on the success factor and lesson learned and the necessary. So leveraging the technology is a must. Expanding on the virtual care services, for example, hospital, and we have a very example in Saha Virtual Hospital, where really has decreased the number of visiting hospital and clinics. Many people actually has the habit of change during the pandemic, and wearing a mask was acceptable and continue to be. And in crowded, and maybe some people they will like to area that is less crowded. It may impact on the also urban aspect. To avoid unnecessary trip, many people are ordering online, and that's actually changing the behavior. Where we see it in all, and we are living it. So, how's the urban infrastructure we're gonna handle all the this change in the social aspects, and in this aspect. So. Addressing challenges is critical for future urban planning. Increased number of population. There are potential projects where by increasing the population of Riyadh, for example, from 50 to 20, increase the number of local foreigner and investor and tourists, might increase the number of vehicle, and also the threat for traffic accident as well, and increase the industry field may increase the risk of air pollution. However, there are project actually to overcome this, and we are living it. Investing in the project of redesigning the city to improve the infrastructure for safe walking, cycling, outdoor and physical activity, and green open spaces. Improve the designing of the road and enforce the law to reduce the traffic accidents. Alhamdulillah, we managed in Saudi Arabia to reduce the road traffic accident to significant amount, to close to 13 per 100,000. People implement projects that target air quality and develop policy to protect resident health. The vision of 2030 has a very promising initiative and project that we are alhamdulillah living out, will improve the urban life and infrastructure and promoting the healthy life. The Riyadh Sport Boulevard is a mega, and most of you are sure that you heard about it. And actually, it's a mega project. Actually, where we provide the path and space for pedestrian and cyclists to practice healthy lifestyle. It's actually 135 kilometer long and more than 4.4 million meter square of green open space, allowing around 2.2 million Riyadh residents to walk to it in less than 30 minutes. The public transportation, sure that it's a promising project to reduce the pollution in Riyadh. So we have a very huge project, alhamdulillah, Saudi Arabia, where we have Saudi Green Initiative is an ambitious national initiative that to focus on combating climate change, improve the quality of life, and protecting the environment of future generation. 17 renewable energy projects are under development, and 18 million tree planted, and 60 hectare of land is rehabilitated in 2022. Riyadh Khadra also, the ambitious Green Riyadh projects aim to plant over 7.5 million trees to increase the green space in Riyadh from 1.5 to 9%, which will provide and will poses and to improve the air quality and promote the health style. The National Program for Development of Group Housing for Individual, Sakan al-Jama' al-Afrad, which aim to improve the healthy, safe, and sustainable housing environment especially for workers in Saudi Arabia. So we in Wiqaya, we work through people, with people, and for people as well. Through monitoring the health risk and work with the relevant entity to develop protocol, standard, and program to promote healthy lifestyle and prevent the disease and protect the people. Urbanization cannot be emphasized, and how important to make the neighborhood, and by say the city, resilient to future pandemic, and also to make the people healthier, safer, and more prosperous. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Ghwayzan, for the informative presentation. Thank you so much. So as we delve deeper into the topic, we are privileged to have Dr. Michael Mahaffey, the Executive Director of Sustasis Foundation, who will provide us with a brief overview of COVID-19 as a teachable moment for cities. With over 35 years of experience in urban development, Dr. Mahaffey is a renowned strategic consultant, planner, researcher, educator, and author. Dr. Mahaffey's research interest is on walkable mixed-use development, the dynamics of urban growth, economics, urban networks, and effective new tools. Before we start with Dr. Mahaffey to start, I invite all our participants and invitees to write their questions or submit their questions in the chat, and we will try our best to cover most of the questions during the joint discussion. So Dr. Mahaffey, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me reshare my screen here. So what I'm going to do is step back a little bit and give a broader picture of where we are now, what we've learned in this teachable moment, you might say, of coming out of COVID. Our colleague Mohammed Ahmad Al-Rashid is going to give a more detailed description of the research project that we recently completed, looking at Saudi cities specifically. But what I'll do is speak a little more broadly about what some of the issues are that this pandemic has illuminated for us. And I think one of the things we have learned most fundamentally relates to public space and the importance of public space. That to me is certainly a major lesson, because we've learned that when we don't have public space, we miss it terribly. When we're in lockdown, when we're unable to meet our neighbors and get access our nearby stores and services. This is a very, very important impact on our quality of life, on our ability to, have a well-being and exercise and do all the things that are so important. And what we recognize, I think, coming out of the pandemic is that public space really is the foundation of urban connectivity. If you don't have the public space, you don't have good connectivity between all the other parts of the city. You maybe have capsules that connect them in automobiles and so on, but that is a much more limited way of being connected. And what we've seen coming out of the pandemic is the problems that we've already had prior to the pandemic have been exacerbated. The over-encapsulated high emissions, high depletion, high impact, car-dependent lifestyle that has taken a serious toll on our health even before the pandemic. And it's also hardest on the most vulnerable populations, including those of modest incomes, those with chronic diseases, children, the elderly, and so on. I think another important lesson we've learned is that density in the abstract is not really the problem. You know, early on in the pandemic, a lot of people blamed density and they said, we've got to leave our city cores and go out into, you know, lower density environments. But I think we realize that that is not the case, that it's the form of density, the pattern of connectivity that matters. These three diagrams are actually exactly the same density, but what you'll notice is the pattern of connectivity and the pattern of potential transmission of disease is very, very different. In the tall building, everyone is brought together into the lobby and into the elevator core and stairwell. In the row house type pattern, everyone is more diffuse. In the perimeter block pattern to the lower right, it's a sort of somewhere between the two. Very different patterns of connectivity, same density. So it isn't density that we should be blaming. And furthermore, there are ways to maintain a very well-connected public realm, connecting between the public and the private. This happens to be my granddaughter's standing on the porch with my daughter in their house, and you can see that they are very well connected to the public realm, the sidewalk there where I am standing. And even if they were, you know, positive for COVID, they would not transmit it to me and vice versa. So we can be connected to one another. We can have what I call sociable distancing. And this illuminates a broader lesson, I think, which is that public spaces need to connect us, but they also need to protect us from disease transmission, but also from disruption and noise and danger, vehicles and crime and all the other things that we need to be able to control in our environments. And you can see that these kinds of spaces like the porch, like the house with the door, can modulate our connectivity to the public spaces. This is a very important characteristic of public spaces. They need to exclude as well as include, and they need to do that at a variety of scales. And this is something that the new urban agenda, the outcome document of the Habitat 3 conference, has really put as a central concept. Improving the quality of public space for all residents as a fundamental goal. And you may know the new urban agenda was adopted by acclamation by all 193 countries, including, of course, Saudi Arabia, the United States, and many, many others. And there's a language there about the importance of public space, of not only you know, parks and green spaces, but streets as public space, networks of open, multi-purpose, safe, inclusive, accessible, green, and quality public spaces. A mouthful, but very important, I think, to discuss. And you'll see the same language also in the Sustainable Development Goals about the importance of public space as a kind of fundamental urban structure, and all the different characteristics that the benefits that public space provides: social interaction, human health and well-being, economic exchange, cultural expression, and so on. And there's a lot of research emerging on that documents how important it is, for example, for economic exchange and for knowledge spillovers, as they are referred to. The idea that it's not just in the office place or in the home among your family, it's in these casual encounters within public space that knowledge transfer occurs, that's so essential to economic creativity and development. Also resilience, the work of Eric Kleinenberg on the Chicago heat wave in 1995, how very, very important it was to have good quality public space, literally a matter of life and death. That was one of the 4 factors that he identified as key conditions resulting in deaths. So this is not only a issue of well-being, it can be an issue of life and death. And there's a lot of other research showing very similar issues as well. There's ecological benefits, reducing pavement, reducing emissions, water infiltration zones, and so on and so on. Our own research at KTH in Stockholm and now in a number of university partners is looking at the research on public space, gathering it together from many different disciplines. terrapublica.org is the website if you're interested in having a look at that. And it's very important, I think, the conclusions that there is extensive literature on public space, but it's fragmented between different disciplines. There's an urgent need to assess those lessons and to translate them into policy and practice and to change the paradigm. And the paradigm, of course, is one that we inherited from the early 20th century, that we thought we were doing something important and beneficial by pulling the city apart, segregating into functional zones and getting rid of the sort of messiness of cities. But unfortunately, what we did is we got rid of this essential public space tissue. We isolated everyone in capsules, especially the capsule of the automobile. And this is something that we're now dealing with. This was very profitable as an economic development strategy, but it had very many consequences, very many externality costs, as the economists say. And we're now dealing with those costs, recognizing how important it was, or what consequential it was, to rationally segregate, to pull the city apart and encapsulate everyone in the capsule of the home and the capsule of the workplace, connected by the capsule of the car, and losing that essential tissue of public space that is so fundamentally important. And we're seeing the consequences of this around the world, even before the pandemic, of course. The inward turning centers, shopping centers, gated communities, and of course, informal settlements with very low quality public space. So this is very, very important, and very important that we identify the work that needs to be done, not only to change the model, but to develop a whole series of tools and strategies that can effectively change the way practice is done, the implementation that I know many of you are thinking about and doing in your own work, changing the regulations, the zoning, more towards form-based coding, changing the incentives, the financial structures, targeting grants and micro grants, public education, catalytic projects, the important government projects like what's going on in the Saudi vision, the Saudi projects, and the other kinds of institutional structures, improvement districts, economic entities, and so on. There's a whole burgeoning body of tools and strategies that I think are so essential that we work on. And I'll just mention one that we included in our research project at the Center for Local Governance, which is a pattern language for Saudi cities after COVID. And a number of those, this is based upon the pattern language work that is very widely used in many fields, including software, started in urban planning and architecture, and has since been taken up in many other fields. And so what we did is took this pattern language methodology and developed a series of patterns or tools, evidence-based tools. And these are a couple of examples of thermal comfort patterns. So internal public passageways, large-scale misting systems, and so on. Each pattern gives you a general description, and then there are hyperlinks and links to other resources, very much like a wiki page. In fact, wiki was a direct outgrowth of the pattern language methodology. So this is one web-based kind of tool that can be used to distribute and refine and develop these essential tools that we need. We need more of those. We need big data tools, remote sensing, economic tools, regulatory tools, and take on new challenges, issues of the global South, informal settlements, and so on. Very important. Very quickly, I'm going to wrap up with a couple of key conclusions that I think my colleague will speak a little bit more about. This pandemic has produced an extraordinary period of disruption, I think we all recognize, and yet it's a typical pattern throughout history. It's an opportunity to disrupt business as usual and to find creative new approaches to deeper problems. The pandemic offers an opportunity to drive much needed change. I think we recognize how we need more walking and biking, accelerated efforts for urban greening, more impetus for economic and social resilience, and the need to develop better tools and strategies. We see critical problems for cities, but we see also the exacerbation of those problems, inadequacies in the healthcare system, insufficient attention to preventative healthcare, auto-centric lifestyles, a lack of access to good quality public spaces, and so on. And yet we see promising new tools and approaches that are emerging, new models of governance and finance, new regulatory mechanisms, older tools being deployed in innovative new ways, like the pattern language methodology. Many agencies and stakeholders are ready to accelerate the change, but they need new and more coordinated forms of organization to bring their work into focus. And I think this is where the center's work is so important. Greater interagency collaboration, new forms of public-private partnership, new modes of financial and investment delivery, and new ways of sharing and educating better models of design and planning. So that's a quick summary of what you might say the impacts of the current period are, and what perhaps some of the takeaways are. And I know Mohammed Ahmad Al-Rashid will talk in a little more detail later about the specific outcome of our research project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahathi, for sharing your valuable insights. Now, let's turn our attention to the influence of disruptive forces on transformational urban planning conventions. We are honored to have Dr. Hindoker Mohammed Nahad Al-Zaman, the program lead for urban resilience at the University of British Columbia in Canada. Besides teaching, he is currently heavily engaged on collaborative research projects with governments and industrial partners in the province of British Columbia and across Canada. Dr. Nahad Al-Zaman's research interests lie at the intersection of urban transformation, smart cities, and the environment. Please don't forget to write your questions to Dr. Nahad Al-Zaman in the chat. Dr. Nahad Al-Zaman, please enlighten us on the topic of navigating change in urban planning.
Sure, thank you very much. Let me share my screen here. Do you see my screen here? Is it okay? All right. Thank you, everyone. It's a nice opportunity to come here and share some of the thoughts that we're working on issues like transformation planning in the sense of COVID-19 and how we can learn from that. So my talk will be mainly on 3 points before I go to the part of transformational planning. So I'll be looking at climate change and how they're impacting on producing different disruptions and how we are learning from those disruptions. Number 2, pandemic has been a really big threat and also big disruption in the part of civilization. And we are trying to understand how pandemic could be understood from during versus post-pandemic period, and what are the takeaways we can learn from those events that we have experienced through. Undoubtedly, pandemic has been a big shock, big threat, even though it has a periodicity. It comes every 100 years, every 50 years, and so on. But our cities are very much complacent to the fact that we are not ready to have those disruptions, which might make a big changes that you have seen during the past 4 years. I'll look into another dimension, which is inflation, that the whole world is literally getting the hit of. And I'll try to see that how inflation could be one big disruption, and that could be impacting a lot in terms of how we think about city planning design and how we interact among the communities and across the countries. And all those 3 points could be understood from the point of that how these 3 could be really impacting to understand the impact of transformation that we're experiencing, perhaps without knowing that is happening in our back of the knowledge. So I'll try to have such enlightenment kind of insights on those, and perhaps we can discuss more during the part of the discussion session where you may have questions on how the situation and so on. Moving forward, as I mentioned, climate change definitely has been a big disruption, no doubt. And if you look at those photos here, they're all from Canada, by the way. This is not from a country which is perhaps from a low economic situation. So Canada has been experiencing field disruptions starting from wildfires, from floods, from droughts to earthquake, name it. So no cities in the world are free from such disruptions, right? We cannot say that. And just to give you a sense of understanding, the wildfires that happened just this year, in summer of 2023, has been a really big change phenomenon that happened in the province of British Columbia, also across Canada. Imagine the 13 provinces, along with the Northwest Territories and so on, have been highly hit by wildfires because the country is heavily located towards forest regions and so on. But the way the situation has been changing, wildfires has been unphenomenal, right? So imagine that across the whole summer, actually all provinces mostly in Canada have been in a situation of only tackling wildfires, and there is no chance for other resources to be employed for other kind of services because they had scanty of financial resources. So wildfires have been a really new phenomenon, not necessarily it's been happening for the last 50 years, but for the last decades, it has been ramping up and it's causing us the intensity of influences. And it shows how this could be impacting the choice of your location for residents. At the same time, how you understand the land use planning regulations, which might be impacting the choice of your residents as well. So definitely wildfires have been one big disruption. And imagine even the country like Canada have a huge drought problem, meaning that we don't have enough water resources, water supply that we need for, especially back in British Columbia where I'm living at. So in British Columbia has a high impact of water scarcity, meaning that we cannot have enough water which might be used for irrigation from household uses and other purposes. Just in this year, the year we are at now, we have the highest intensity of of drought, which went up to 5 scale. Imagine that. 5 meaning that this is the highest possible drought could be happening anytime in the year. So we had the situation, wildfires, and then back-to-back drought. And then if you look back just 2 years ago in 2021, we had a mega flood situation in British Columbia, meaning that that flood really devastated every infrastructure, including roads, culvert, bridges, any other houses that were destroyed. So that floods were really a eye-opening situation for the entire governance to see how we are unprepared, how we are thoughtful to the part that what may happen that we're experiencing now, especially the part that if you look into the big cities like Vancouver, even the vicinity of Vancouver, for example, like Merritt, City of Merritt, and all those other cities, they were really highly impacted by floods. And that floods was such a mega event, it cost us about $7 billion. So imagine if you look into all those possible chances of disruptions, wildfires, drought, floods, and earthquake has been definitely a rampant event in British Columbia. So we have all those disruptions. The question now, how do you what are the takeaways we can learn from those disruptions, right? Because they're going to be happening as per the timeline. And now with the situation of new immersion of intensity and also the exposure, we are in a situation which is very much difficult to adjust with because we are financially constrained, we are technically constrained. At the same time, when it comes to preparation, we are not so thoughtful to see what may happen in the future. Moving forward, pandemic has been a really big threat, as I mentioned. And the question now, what are the takeaways that we have learned from pandemic, right? So I'll give you a few insights which might help you to understand how this is causing transformation planning to be happening in the cities. So literally, when we had the pandemic, definitely we have seen the hybrid working options, meaning that I can work from anywhere in the country, in the city, doesn't matter my office locations. I can still be same efficient as in my offices, right? Same for schooling. I didn't have to go to schooling. My kids didn't have to go to school. They were at home and they were literally virtually attending schooling system all through 2 years timing. And if you look into your daily necessities, literally you can order anything online. E-commerce really have played a big role in the situation of let's say, constrained environment of COVID-19. We literally was able to order anything, let's say for your grocery, you're ordering Instacart, for example. For your any kind of necessities, you're ordering from Amazon. You have other kind of options which is delivering from the point of service to your doorstep. right? So all those are virtual services. Literally, we have been so accustomed with the virtual services that we are very much used to that, because that is suiting our lifestyle, that is saving our time, right? So the question now, given this new momentum of virtual services and dependency, what can we see that impacted that onto the city structure? I'll come to that very soon, another point. But again, we have been very virtual. Even now, I'm talking from Canada, British Columbia. I'm talking to you in Saudi Arabia. So as if we are very much close communities, right? It doesn't make a big difference. So what does that hybrid structure of virtual, even virtual versus physical, have impacted our physical manifestation is important thing to consider. So I'll get back to you in the next slide to see how they're impacting. Before doing so, there is another disruption we have is inflation, right? Which is causing a lot more problem to the living style, because living expenses have been really very high, and due to inflation, there's a high market price of house, high mortgage price, a high mortgage interest rate. So people are really struggling to see if they can maintain their mortgage cost on a daily basis. And even they're trying to get away from the cities, which is very expensive to living at, to the remote areas where they can have a decent housing conditions with their decent rent as well. So just to give you a sense of understanding how such inflation really get people moved away from the cities was amazing. Just in this year, in 2023, or the last 2 years actually, due to pandemic time and so on. So there was a huge influx of demigration from Vancouver, from BC in general, to other provinces, because Alberta is a province which is quite reasonable in terms of taxation. There is no sales tax involved and so on. Even the housing price is quite lower in Alberta. So there's a high influx from Ontario, from BC to Alberta, to see how people are adjusting their lifestyle to a certain province, which offers them a lower living cost. So imagine that how inflation has been really make people move from a place to the places where they may have better living conditions with a cheaper price. I'm sure the heat has been well received across the world, but just to give you a sense how in Canada we are receiving this heat and how it has caused migration people to move from one place to the other. So now the question of the amalgamation, right? What are the takeaways of these three disruptions? So starting from climate change, which is will be happening in the next few decades. We have pandemic that happened in the 2 years ago. We have post-pandemic consequences. Now with the new dimension of disruption of inflation, we have a new situation of migration happening across the countries. So what does it tell us? That's the important question. So imagine that now, I mean, if you're working from home totally, then possibly it doesn't matter where you are at in the city, as long as you're close to your certain community services. So house location has been quite immaterial in terms of your virtual services. You can work from home, you can order everything online. So you don't have to be in the city with the expensive cost of rent or mortgage price. So in that sense, housing location has been a challenge now to see. They could be anywhere in the country, in the remote regions, in the rural areas, doesn't matter, as long as you have certain basic services supporting your lifestyle. Number two, your mobility has been really changed, because you're not anymore going to shopping mall, grocery stores, or any other kind of service centers for services. Rather, they're coming to you, right? So literally, you're saving trips by your e-commerce services, right? So if you add up all your services that you do physically, that has been replaced by virtual services. So there's a reversal trend of my mobility and also trips across the cities that you're seeing really happening a lot. The question is that even if you see the same trend continues about dependency of virtual services in the future, there's a huge change in trip pattern. There's a huge change in mobility that we see in the past, right? So in that sense, there's a high possibility that our mobility has been changed. It will be changing as well in the future. Now, the question of land use convention. So the way you see the land use, for example, it has to be in coordination with other settings, like your service abilities, your other facilities like schooling, grocery stores, and so on. So now imagine that if you are away from the city because you have a very nice internet connections and you can work from there in the forest areas even, right? So it don't need to be close to very high commercial areas, very high CBD or some areas where you have to pay higher prices. So literally, you can choose your living style depending on where you can save your money, and you can do the same job that you do in daily life. And then at the same time, look at the living style in the cities these days. We are very much cramped. We are very much in dense situation where we don't have much of opportunity for open public space, open mobility kind of around the vicinity. So imagine if you're away from the city areas, you may have better living conditions where you have better air, you have better environment, you have good facilities there. So you might choose to opt for going away from the city than to living in the city, because that will be saving you cost to a certain extent. And we have seen the trip has been changed because of e-commerce services. And at the same time, there is a high price changes happening in the cities because of this inflation, and also people going away from the cities to other remote regions. So if you if you add up all those possible changes we are looking at now, which may be caused by pandemic, may be caused by our disruptions of climate changes, or could be our dependency on e-commerce. So how they're really impacting our life slowly, even gradually, it might be ramping up very high in the future. It is a matter of question now, how do you foresee our city to be, and how do you plan for it? And if you are really able to have that ability to plan for the future cities. So I'll leave the questions for you guys to discuss in the session of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Nahal Zaman, for your thoughtful, provoking presentation. We appreciate your insights and expertise. Now let's explore the model choice of behavioral change of users during COVID-19 pandemic, focusing on the Sicilian experience. We are delighted to have Dr. Tiziana Campisi with us today. She is an assistant professor at Core University of Ina in Italy. She is an expert on road quality management and also on sustainable mobility. She has published more than 130 manuscripts in international and indexing journals and conferences. She serves as an editor-in-chief for Open Transportation Journal as a member of different editorial boards. Dr. Campisi research interests lie at transport, supply and demand, sustainable and shared mobility, road safety, and road traffic micro simulation. As always, please feel free to write your questions in the chat. Dr. Campisi, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I'm honored to show today an overview on transport and mobility planning in the post-pandemic phase, with particular reference to Italian context and the Sicily region. The COVID-19 pandemic soon spread to Italy, becoming one of the first European countries. As reported on these slides, that you can see, there is a brief description of the date that underline the advent of different regulatory restriction and limitation in the mobility sector. From 2020 to 2021, a strong reduction in mobility was observed, limiting travel only with the prior authorization of the government and mostly for work and health purpose. 2021 was characterized by the discovery and spread of vaccine, and the restriction were reduced at the end, and then the travel scenarios slowly returned to normal. One of the sectors that suffered the most was undoubtedly public transport and shared mobility. This can also be correlated to the widespread feelings and perception of stress and fear in using this model of transport, which had been declared the potential place of greatest contagion. The limitation of the number of people on board and the distance between individual users together with the use of masks and hand sanitizers have progressively mitigated the phenomenon of contagion. During the end of 2021, mobility scenarios underwent a change, returning to pre-COVID level. But it is necessary to highlight that the number of users traveling by private vehicle remain high. This reduces the effect of climate change mitigation action planned and implemented before the pandemic phase. The last year has seen a complete return to the pre-pandemic scenarios, but other phenomena have characterized the trends of mobilities, such as the energy crisis. As summarized on this slide, it can be emphasized that the changing trends in modal choice have not only negatively characterized Italy, but many countries around the world. Some local or government strategies have, however, promoted to use specific transport modes, such as walking or cycling or e-scootering. This model forms has been considered from the outset as having a lower risk of contagion than public and shared transport. In Italy and in Sicily, an increase in on-to-work travel has been observed in 2021 and 2022 respectively, although many companies have allowed teleworking and on-to-school travel. In particular, from 2021, all students went at school to attend lessons, and leisure travel increased in 2022, but less than in 2019. A survey created by JRC Institute in 2021 measured the impact of COVID-19 on daily life and mobility. About 14 European cities were studied, and in Italy, the cities of Milan and Catania. The results show that the pandemic has changed travel frequency, travel reason, and modal choices. They highlight the three effects, such as increase of use of private vehicle, increase on walking for a short distance, and a reduction in the use of all forms of public and shared transport, including taxis and DRT. Therefore, urban and mobility planners, together with local and state governments, have had to implement different strategies to mitigate this problem. Strong increase in the use of private vehicle and a decrease of more than 15% in public transport service lead to a greater congestion on road network immediately after the restriction of travel. Today, these results has been reduced, but in some national contexts, a gap in demand still exists, which causes significant financial and operational concern and can reduce the sustainability of different service providers. Different research institutes and associations have published reports in which they have evaluated the trend relating to the various transport modes, considering weekday and holidays. They underline some advantages of mobility on foot or by bicycle, also thanks to the implementation and creation of temporary infrastructures titled pop-up lane and relating to cycle and pedestrian paths. One of the main long-term challenges always remain the need to improve the local level of transport and achieve climate neutralities. As regards the Sicilian context, the slide shows some variation in mobility trends in accordance with national data, and it must be underlined, however, that this region is characterized by a lack of public transport in the inner areas and a reduced percentage of trips by high-speed train. Therefore, private car use reached peak of over than 90% at the end of 2021 and 2022. Sicily was among the few regions that has been studied from a research point of view regarding mobility trend during COVID pandemic. Many studies carried out by my research group has underlined the dissemination of data through the administration and of questionnaire and interview, and describe the propensity to Sicilian to use the different transport modes, different transport and various COVID phases pandemic, and underline some variables that fix these different changes, such as age, gender, etc. And on this slide, we can summarize that one big lack on this regional context is related to the sustainable urban mobility plans that and also urban traffic plans that which for many Italian cities with over than 30,000 inhabitants is mandatory by law. Here I summarize some possible action in order to introduce after pandemic, in order to promote our mobility action, not only mobility, but also last mile logistics, and also encouraging people to introduce and encourage also democratic planning and cooperate on possible intervention on the future planning. Here I'm showing some references about our works, and thank you for attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Campisi, for provoking the valuable insights from your research. Now let's shift our focus to the post-pandemic urban trends and planning for stronger, safer, and more livable Saudi cities. Let me introduce Dr. Mohammed Ahmed Al-Rashid, the Deputy Research Director at the Center for Local Governance. Dr. Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Nawal, and good evening, everyone. Can you share the screen? Can you see the screen?
No.
Can you see now? Yeah, okay.
Yes, Dr. Ahmed, just make it full screen.
Okay, so the topic, as Michael mentioned before, we did a research previously. It was a joint project between the center and Michael and some other fellows from KTH. We did research and tried to investigate the post-pandemic urban trends. We aim to plan for these stronger, safer, and more livable Saudi cities. This is a brief outline. I will just talk about some brief introduction about that. As you see, COVID is seen as a global watershed event and has certainly impacted, and it has been a disruptive period, and which have taken away 6 million people worldwide. And it has seen this phenomena, and this pandemic has been seen as a significant shift in the behavioral aspects, and it has changed the socioeconomic interactions, people behavior, socioeconomic participation, and all of those mitigations, as Dr. Nahid and other fellows have already discussed about. Let's try to put it on the global agenda. The pandemic, of course, have tested our socioeconomic and urban infrastructures. And in Saudi Arabia, as of this report and as of this research, we almost 0.84 million people have been affected by this pandemic. And it at the same time, as we see, it also refers us to provide us a thrilling opportunity to explore more about this urban planning trends. So in that way, we try to investigate about to assess, identify the pandemic urban trends. We did interviews by the key stakeholders in Saudi Arabia to have their insights, what they think about, as well as their institutional assessment about the implications to cater this pandemic, post-pandemic times. Just a brief overview of the global research on this particular topic. There is a large body of research literature on the pandemic, where the existing researchers did research in different dimensions like health implications, where they try to investigate the impact of this COVID on the health and mental health issues, in the economic implications. The researchers have mainly discussed about the impact of the COVID on the real estate and small and medium enterprises. In the social sector, a lot of research has been made in the community resilience, social isolation, quality of life, and happiness. If we talk about the urban and spatial trends, the researchers has explained the disruptive changes, new emerging trends, new opportunities, and on resilient urban planning. On the governance point of view, they have tried to address the role of local leadership is very important to make the transformative changes in the urban planning domain. And lastly, smart cities, how we can manage the COVID through the technology, and how smart cities can actually help cater the pandemic. This is a short summary of the Saudi literature that we did investigated. A bit of research has been done on the green spaces, how it can help and impact of the COVID on the green spaces, and some of the research has been done in the economic side as well, and the social economic implications as well. So regarding our methodology, we interviewed over 28 representatives of the leading city governments and agencies working locally and nationally across the kingdom. We interviewed different national and regional authorities, as you can see in the table. Regarding our approach, we had a set protocol with dedicated questions where they can to reveal how policy experts in the Saudi Arabia they think about, and the questions were asked from the experts how cities can be made stronger, safer, and more livable in the post-pandemic time. So we had around, I think, 11 questions in that in the protocol, and a semi-structured interviews were conducted with each stakeholder, with each participant, as I mentioned in the table before, and it were the face-to-face questionnaires. And we did, as a part of analysis, we did used NVivo as a tool to conduct the coding and analyzing the qualitative data, and all those recording has been transcribed into the text and were included into in the software. And we did the word cloud analysis and thematic analysis based on the coding and in the qualitative transcripts. This is the word cloud of the top 50 words that we derive from the analysis and from the transcripts. As you can see, there has been a much emphasis on the neighborhood, terms like neighborhood, high density, walkable, municipalities, public spaces, of course, mixed use, quality, and humanization as well. So based on that, we did some coding based on the cloud analysis and drive the themes from that. So the number of themes were derived from the analysis, and you can see digital technology. The finding explained that agencies are using technology to monitor COVID and its impact to achieve emerging goals, including the digitalization of municipal services. So regarding new urbanism, the policymakers also raised several discussion points regarding necessity for new urban design, planning paradigms, and approaches that can help in the post-pandemic time. And in the humanization, the team also noted that there were the positive intentions among policymakers and urban experts towards humanizing neighborhoods and cities as well, which you can see in the previous presentation from Mr. Abdullah, that a lot of initiatives are going on to humanize cities. There were also findings also explain, widely clarify that the new master plans are needed that can incorporate the post-pandemic understanding, and it can incorporate the need for the safer public spaces that can promote excellent walkability and mixed use. And the urban codes, or the officials also believe that new codes should be implemented. There should be new strategic plans that can incorporate the needs of the users. And walkability, of course, they put a lot of emphasis on the walkability perspective, and officials are making several interventions to increase walkability. And they also highlighted a lot of implications for the high density neighborhood planning as well. They also mentioned about mixed use development, and there was a separate focus on, especially on the public spaces as well. The urban policy makers in Saudi Arabia, they recognize the importance of public spaces, especially lockdowns, and the discussion revealed that the public parks were most evident manifestations of public realm during the COVID, where people can enjoy and spend their leisure time. And the public spaces with particular services is also important, and agencies are aware of these special needs of citizens, and they are willing to create more and better public spaces with sufficient services. And they also encouraged about the partnership with the private sector to develop these such kind of public spaces. And regarding the legislation and regulations, they consider that these are essential to implement actually these kind of initiatives in Saudi Arabia. The economy, as you see, and tourism was a lot of disruptive phenomena across the world, and the diversification of income is the key in that. And the findings also suggest that these city leading authorities are considering the bigger vision in focus, and they are realizing the importance of economic diversifications, and they are willing to create new opportunities by creating opportunities in less developed areas that can produce sufficient job opportunities for the people. So regarding governance perspective, they highlighted the urban policy deficiencies, and some of them, they understood the necessity of coordination among that, and efforts, they emphasized that the efforts and collaboration should be made to manage these urban issues in that. However, there are some issues regarding lack of limited powers that hinders the proposed implementation of certain initiatives. However, they are highly welcoming this new phenomena, and they are welcoming the change, and the leaders are eager to identify new models, new methods to apply to as we emerge from the pandemic. So there's a need for livable neighborhoods, and the officials, they highlighted the need to have a neighborhood, the improved neighborhood, by providing green infrastructure that can help reduce the temperature and can promote livability as a whole. So lastly, there is a need to emphasize on the culture as well. And the policymakers think that they are heavily reviving the urban infrastructure to promote the local culture and attract the tourists in Saudi Arabian cities. And lastly, I will try to conclude my presentation with the key discussions. Like there's a new normal. As you can see, the agency officials, they acknowledge that the COVID has disrupted almost all aspects of urban planning and had produced a new normal actually. And it was a wake-up call. There's a much need for public spaces and priorities, and there's a need for the compact development. There's a need for the upgradation of the less developed areas, sustainability, the changing markets, the changing economic experts. There's a need to identify more on that, and there is a need to align, to coordinate all these development authorities, and at the local level and the municipal level, and at the regional and the national level, to make a change in that.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for your insightful presentation. Now we have come to the joint discussion part of our webinar, and it will be with Dr. Ahmed, knowing that we have to finish maximum at 6:50. Dr. Ahmed, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Namal. And thank you all speakers, especially Dr. Nahi, Dr. Abdullah, for giving us the insightful insights about this in this webinar. So just to discuss precisely, since Nawal told that we have a limited time for discussion, so we will just go ahead with the limited discussions about particular topics. Like, for instance, Dr. Michael Mahaffey, he talked about, particularly, he emphasized about the public spaces, and I would like to hear and have your expert opinion on that. What can be the strategies for inclusive planning, and how we can involve, especially the community, in the post-pandemic times, and what can be the role of community in planning these public spaces specifically?
I think one thing that has come out of the pandemic is that we need to prioritize public space, and not just think of public space as parks and other open spaces, but think of public space as the streets and as all of the areas around the homes and the businesses and the places where we go to, and make sure that those places are in fact walkable and bikeable, and that we have good transport systems, as the professor was talking about in Italy, and other examples, that we must make sure that public space has good quality, as you had pointed out, and that means also not just the amount of public space in the aggregate, but where it is located and how it is distributed and connected. So I think we have to realign our policies around that. We have to realign our practices, and certainly our educational practices, to make students more aware of how fundamental this is. And I think we need those tools and those strategies, as I alluded to put those into place. For example, urban coding, form-based codes to get the public space, the edges of the public space, supportive of things like walking and interaction and so on. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think it's certainly clearer now coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, I totally agree. When we talk about public spaces, there is a very certain phenomena and a very inclusive methodology of placemaking, and how we can utilize that given the challenges we faced in planning the post-pandemic era, and what sort of tools of placemaking can be utilized given the safer distancing and all those significant criteria that we should follow for the placemaking in that era.
There's a sense, which I think is not quite right, that we've sort of gone off in two different directions. One is the physical direction of public space and recreation and walking and so on, and the other is the digital world and social media and networking and so on. I think what we're recognizing is that we need to integrate those two. We need the digital tools to support the public spaces and the placemaking. I think, if anything, we now realize how fundamentally important it is to have both of those things. We've seen an explosion of online retailing and digital communications, and children going into their homes and getting on social media. I hope they don't do too much of that, but we need to reintegrate those two worlds so that people are using their social media to connect and to gather in public spaces, and to enhance, the ability to use public spaces with augmented reality tools and communication tools where mapping, for example, and transportation network companies where you can have ride sharing and other things. I think that's a big lesson, is that it's not just about, well, we're going to surrender to the digital world. Rather, we're going to bring the digital world and the physical world back together again. I think that's a big lesson coming out of the pandemic.
100%. In the presentation, you were emphasizing about the high density and the mixed use, and what do you see how we can promote, given the guidelines and how we can especially in the Saudi cities, as you have been visiting quite often in the Saudi Arabia, how we can promote the mixed use and high density, given the linear development in Saudi cities and all those aspects given in mind. What can be the future implications for us as an expert for you?
I think the first thing we have to do is just make sure that it is legal to build higher density, more mixed use, projects and neighborhoods. And because we have really created a whole generation of regulations worldwide. And this is, in country after country, and Saudi Arabia is one of those countries, like so many, that have implemented segregated zoning and separated everything out and made it more low density and so on. And thinking that that's how we're going to deal with the urban conflicts that we all have, the noise and disruption and the problems of privacy and so on, not recognizing that we really need to focus on what are the ways to mitigate those impacts rather than just pull them apart. So I think form-based coding is very important. I think other regulatory changes are going to be very important going forward, making it easier to plan those places. I mentioned some other examples of catalytic projects, demonstration projects, funding public-private partnerships where you bring the private sector in as a collaborator and get them to do some of the heavy lifting because they're good at dealing with the market aspects of these projects, but also making sure that the government entities, the public sector, does its part to make it legal and to create the incentives to build more walkable, mixed use and higher density that still protects people, as I was saying, that still, mitigates those impacts that happen when you're at a higher density.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for your insights on that. Just a brief insight from Dr. Nahid. You talk about many important aspects about climate change, monetary inflation, and contemporary land use. What can be the implications for as an urban planner for us? How we can cater to these challenges? How we can address these issues, especially given your experience in Saudi Arabia and all those. Can you recommend a very quick implications for us?
Sure, I think it's a great question. We have to have a systems thinking in place, right? Even though we're looking at all those events like floods, wildfires, drought, and so on, they are very much connected to each other. They're not disparate events, right? And unless you understand all those from a system perspectives, that they are in different places, but they're all connected. So we need to have better connections between the events that are happening throughout the year, be it for financial crisis, be it for let's say disruptions like floods and all those earthquake kind of or even sandstorms kind of events, or be it for any kind of virtual immersions to the physical space, right? So all these are very important, even though they look very discrete, but they're all part of the same coin, right? So we need to understand this from a systems perspective to make sure we can get the connections. We understand how they may impact each other, how they connect to each other strongly, or some weaker connections there. So there are a lot more things to be understood, to be done. So I think this is a good time for us, to think about those systems connections, so we can think it thoroughly, given the previous trends versus what may happen in the future. And this could be a good catalyst in terms of knowing what is the right approach for planning these days, right?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nahid. Since we are running out of time, so I need a quick insight from Dr. Tiziana to just share her insights, given the experience from Italy and Sicilian experience, how the behavior insights and how the equity and accessibility of these, especially the micro mobility in the post-pandemic time, can help us, and it can shape our cities, and what will be the implications in the future, and especially in the post-pandemic time.
Yeah, sure. Different scenarios and different sections demonstrate the lack of regulation and law on these fields, and in the same times, the events and different phase of COVID-19 demonstrate the necessity to obtain a more point of view about behavioral users in order to understand that it's necessary to promote multidisciplinary point of view, considering not only, for example, functional or geometric variables relating to infrastructures and service, but also considering more user behavior in terms of daily activities, in order also to underline and understand better some stress or some other behavioral elements.
Yeah, thank you, Tiziana. Michael, can you give us a very short summarized form of the discussion that we have? We got some interesting insights from all the experts and speakers, including you. So can you summarize and give us some closing remarks? And before that, let me ask from the audience, if they have any questions, they can just raise a hand and they can put a comment and in the text box before we go ahead with the closing.
Sorry, Dr. Ahmed, but Mr. Rani can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that we have questions from the participants. So we can move forward with the closing remark.
Okay. So,
Okay,
yes.
Nawal, by closing, after Dr. Michael's comment.
Okay. Dr. Michael, can you just enlighten us with your concluding remarks about all the thoughts we shared today?
It's been great to have this discussion and to think about this period in history. You know, I think it's so important to step back and look at history in the larger picture. You know, this is not the first time the human race has had a pandemic, and it's not going to be the last. And I think there are very important lessons we can all draw from this experience, from the fact that it has been incredibly traumatic and disruptive, and yet it's also created some opportunities that I think we can all recognize through this discussion. You know, the increased awareness of the importance of place, the importance of being able to walk and being able to bike and being able to interact with your neighbors. When you lose that, when you're locked down, that is very traumatic. And I think there's a renewed momentum for place and placemaking that I think we should all recognize and capture. And I've heard that certainly clearly today. And I think also the importance of actually making the changes in the regulatory structure, in the practice models, adopting the tools that we have available now and that need to be further developed and further implemented, disseminated. There's a lot of work ahead, clearly, and yet I take heart in the fact that there's a lot of momentum and a lot of renewed awareness by many, many people who maybe didn't focus on the importance of their own neighborhood structure, but now are keenly aware of it. So I think this is a moment of opportunity for us, a moment in history when so many issues of sustainability and resilience and climate change and other things have been brought into focus in a much more concrete way because of the pandemic. And I believe and I hope that we will take this momentum and use it to drive forward the changes that are going to be needed. So I appreciate everyone's very interesting perspective on this and the opportunity to gather with you today.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I also want to extend my gratitude to our esteemed panel, the speakers, and all participants who involved in making this discussion an inspiration and insightful discussion that we have today. So let's continue to shape the same energy to shape our cities that employ not just resilient but sustainable cities, to be and to employ that and to gather these insights into our policies and recommendations for our future research projects. So let's drive together for a sustainable and livable neighborhoods and communities in our cities. So thank you all for being part of this wonderful and exciting session, and see you again, inshallah. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.